Welcome to Into Africa. My name is Mvemba Pezo Dizolele. I'm a senior fellow and the director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is a podcast where we talk everything Africa: politics, economics, security, and culture. Welcome. African immigrants to the United States have left their mark on all dimensions of American life. From the taxi drivers to the military officers to the NASA scientists and policymakers in the government and Congress, African immigrants contribute enormously to this country. However, when one looks at the food industry or restaurant space, African immigrants do not seem to fare as well. Except for Ethiopian restaurants, it is often a challenge to find a good African restaurant in major US cities. Yet, as a continent of 54 countries, African cuisine is as varied and diverse as Africa. That cuisine, or shall I say those African cuisines, are often very healthy, and African staple foods serve as a vital link connecting Africans to the global community. So why is it that we do not see many good African restaurants in the United States? Is it about food? We know Africans are entrepreneurial. Do they face other obstacles such as finance? Or is it about service? What would it take to change this situation? Joining me on Into Africa today to help address these questions is Pierre Thiam, a renowned chef, author, and social activist celebrated for popularizing West African cuisine globally through TED Talk and books. Pierre is the executive chef of Teranga in New York City and Nok by Alara in Lagos, Nigeria, where he has introduced healthy, locally sourced West African dishes. Pierre is also the executive chef at the Pullman Hotel in Dakar, Senegal. Pierre Thiam, welcome to Into Africa.
Thank you, Mvemba. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have made it your business to feed people. You also made it your business to push African food around the world, not just in Senegal and New York. I'm sure you've done a few other things. I read somewhere actually that you fed the King of Morocco and President Emmanuel Macron of France. Why food? Why African food? And why do we still have these challenges?
Why food? I guess food is vital. I mean, food is something we all need to have. And I love food, actually. And why African food? This is the food I actually enjoy the most. Why am I doing this? You know, there's a lot of whys here. But why am I doing this? How I stumbled into this profession is when I first arrived to New York as a young student. I had a student visa when I came to New York. And that was back in the late 80s, early 90s. I was here after a period of student crisis in Senegal, where we had so many days of strikes that the government shut the university down. At the time, I was a student at Cheikh Anta Diop University, which was in the Department of Physics and Chemistry. For me to finish my degree, like many of my peers, we had to figure out a way to leave the country, and there was no hope really for us. And out of all places, this college in Cleveland, Ohio, accepted my application, and I got a student visa from the embassy. So I was on my way to Ohio, decided to stop by New York. There was no direct flight from Dakar to Cleveland. So New York was a stop. I had a friend who lived here, and that stop was supposed to be 2 weeks. It lasted 30 plus years. So to make a long story short, being in the restaurant world in this wonderful food capital of the world, which is New York City, I saw an opportunity. I had been working from the bottom up in this field. There was so many amazing food being present in New York, but the food from Africa, as you well mentioned in your introduction, was absent. And that food, to me, had its place here for different reasons. You grow up in a city like Dakar, which is a city where there's such a diversity, a beautiful pastiche of food from the region, from the street food, the women from Benin making these amazing black eyed pea fritters, and you have the maki, what we call maki, from Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon. all that is present in Dakar, not to mention the wonderful food that mom and the aunties cook at home, the chewijan, our national dish, which is like this amazing, it's a bad comparison when you say amazing paella, because it's much more flavorful than a paella, but this is a rice-based dish with, seafood or tomato-based, or, the yassa with the grilled chicken. All those wonderful flavors were just absent, and I knew they had a place in New York City. And, as you mentioned, there's such a beautiful diversity of food from the continent that you cannot say there's one cuisine. There's cuisines. You take Nigeria, it's like a country with 200 plus languages. So imagine the diversity of the cuisine that can come out of it, and, not only the ingredients, but their methods of cooking. So all of that just made me confident that there was a way to find inspiration in that cuisine. As I'm growing as a chef, I wanted to grow as a chef that find inspiration in its tradition. It didn't make sense for me as being a chef from West Africa to present my cuisine being inspired by French cuisine. And that's what was taught to us. The classics in cuisines were always inspired by French cuisine, and that didn't resonate right. I knew that Africa had its place. I knew that food was amazing, and I knew that New Yorkers would be ready for it. So that's how I started. Eventually, I left the restaurants where I had become a chef, a restaurant in Soho, very successful at the time, to launch my catering and focus on West African food.
Okay, so let's take it from there. Chemistry and physics.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you were studying at the University Cheikh Anta in your home country of Senegal. You come to Cleveland. What happens in Cleveland, and why you go from Cleveland to New York?
No, you missed a step here. I stopped by New York on my way to Cleveland.
And then?
I tell you today, I still don't know what Cleveland looks like.
So you never made it to Cleveland?
I never made it.
So you step in New York.
I step in New York.
The city that never sleeps.
The city that never sleeps, yes, exactly.
And you decided this is the stop. Forget Ohio. The university is waiting for you. They're still waiting. They've been waiting all this time. And you say you started from the bottom up. What happened? What does that mean when you say you started from the bottom? So you had to live. You came back from a foreign country. You had to survive, like all of us. And then what happened there?
I arrived in New York 3 days after I arrived. I had $3,000 approximately. And that was my ticket to Ohio, and then beginning in Ohio, figuring it out. Me and a friend of mine, actually, who made it to Ohio and who became a physics and chemical engineer, Abib. So anyway, my way to Ohio, I stopped by New York. Another friend of ours lived here. He lived in, there's like these places where lots of Senegalese immigrants were living. It was kind of a hotel / immigrant rooms / lots of junkies. At the time, New York was late 80s. It was the AIDS epidemic. It was crack epidemic. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that time.
Yes.
So those were my neighbors in New York. And 3 days after I arrived, I was robbed. Everything that I had in savings were gone. So I had a return ticket to Senegal, which I considered very much. I was hating New York with all my guts, but there was no way for me to make it to Ohio. And I coincidentally happened to have one of the Senegalese immigrants who were living in that hotel, was working in a restaurant in the West Village. And that restaurant was looking for a busboy position. A busboy is the guy in the room who just cleans up the plates and fills up the water glasses for the customers. And that didn't require any particular skills. So that's how I was hired for that job. And the boss of that restaurant was still a good friend, Richard Garvin. The restaurant was in the West Village. And that became my very first boss, my very first job. I've learned so much from being there. And the most important thing for me was in that kitchen of that restaurant, that's when I realized that men could cook. I had never seen men in the kitchen.
The cooks were all men?
All men in the kitchen. Or chef
nothing like Senegal?
No, nothing like West Africa, from Chef Bill all the way to Manuel, the dishwasher, and Samba, the guy who got me the job. They were all men in that kitchen. And they were crazy men too. There was a crazy crew. And they became my friends, really. They became the place I wanted to hang out the most. The food looked amazing. And the chef took a liking into me.
And what type of cuisine was
It
this?
was American. It was modern American. The chef had studied in France, so he liked to practice his French with me. And that's how he invited me. He knew my story. He knew that I was hating what I was doing now. I always thought of myself as like an intellectual, and I'm doing this manual job. And he's like, no, you have to, there is a path out of this. And actually, why don't you take extra shifts when you finish busboy? Come in the kitchen and become a dishwasher. And I'm like, no, I can't be a dishwasher. But there was money coming my way, and there was extra money that I badly needed. And I took those jobs. And chef was like really became a mentor to me. He was like taking me from the dishwasher shift to like learning how to do prep, using a knife, using those skills, using a cleaning table. So that's how I went from the prep, and then from the prep to garde-manger, which is the next station after garde-manger. That's when you walk into the cold station of the kitchen and start to learn the salads and the dressings, and start to now realize that cooking is chemistry. So that's the link now, because you're realizing that every reaction in the kitchen, all the sauces, all respond to what you learn in the lab. The lipids, the vinegar is the acid, the lemon, the juice is the other acid. Those things are reactions that you can understand now. You understand the terms, even the terms that we use, emulsion that becomes a vinaigrette. Those things were like things that I knew in theory, and now I'm like really applying it and realizing that this is even more interesting than what I was learning in labs at Dakar University. This is instant gratification. You can taste it. It's so much more interest than the theory. And eventually from garde-manger, you move to the other stations in the kitchen, to the grill, to the sauces, to the line cook. From line cook, eventually I left that restaurant, and I had a skill now. So I went to work in an Italian restaurant, learning a different type of cooking skills. Then to a French bistro, Jean-Claude in Soho, still there. They have a few locations now. And from Jean-Claude, went to work to another restaurant called Boom. So that's at Boom that I eventually got promoted to chef de cuisine. That restaurant was a special place. It was when Soho was booming in New York. And we had like an A-list of clientele. And it was so successful that they opened 2 more locations. And one of them, I was designated to be the chef de cuisine at that location. It was in South Beach, Miami, where I became the chef de cuisine. And as I'm designing the menu, I'm also asked to add the influences from my cuisine, because those influences, I was already starting to serve them to the staff. When we do family meal at the restaurant, we serve those influences, like you do whatever you want for family meal. But when I do family meal, I was thinking of food from my memory and serving, peanut sauce and red sauce and okra stew and yassa, and the staff always loved it. So when I got promoted to run the South Beach restaurant, I was asked, why don't you do specials of like West Africans that you do? And that was the beginning of this journey for me.
Impressive. So as you get to that point, then when does it fully click and you say, I'm going to do my own thing? I'm going to bring Senegal to the United States. I'm going to deliver it and they will like it. Part of the challenge, you hear a lot of questions when you ask people, you say, well, why there's not enough African restaurants around places? And people say, well, those are foreign tastes. For instance, you hear questions like they say, American palate is not going to handle it. Right? It's too spicy or it's too acidic or whatever. But yet we see Indian restaurants, we see Chinese restaurants, and maybe those restaurants, those cuisines have adapted to the American palate. I don't know. You are the experts here. What clicked with you and within you? And then when you went about it, how did you address those questions, those challenges?
It did show up, obviously. It showed up because, we have been bombarded with all these stories about Africa that even condition us to think that either we are not enough or our food is not enough, that we even don't have a cuisine. That's actually some of the questions, silly questions I heard when my first cookbook came out and I was doing my round of interviews. Some people just sort of Africa as a continent of starvation, of a continent where you need to help them and feed them. So anyway, those questions obviously came up, but very easily I didn't hear that voice because I could see I had experienced all these other cuisines. I was in New York in the pulse of it, and I could see I appreciated those other cuisines, and I knew that African food had its place, and even further, as I was cooking those dishes in during family meal, that moment where someone in the kitchen prepares for the whole staff, I could see how all these people in the staff were reacting to the food. They loved it. They never had it before. Just they loved it. And that place where we were at Boom was a place where we would also have influences from Southeast Asia at the time. It was really starting. It was early 90s in New York, so it was starting to come. It wasn't even big yet at the time. But those flavors from Southeast Asia had some similarities to what we had in West Africa. They used the fermentation in the flavors. They used those spices and those chilies. That was a cuisine that was about to explode. And I knew I was in a place where I could appreciate that, and I could see the destination where things were going.
So you saw the wave, you wanted to catch the wave.
Yeah, I saw an opportunity, and that was more than opportunity. I also wanted to rewrite the story that was told about who we are. Because cuisine is something that's important. That's where civilization begins. And that's the moment where they make you believe that your cuisine is not good enough. You are in trouble, because that's really something that we need to take time to think through. The recipes that we have, especially our traditional recipes, have been passed upon from generation to generation. This is something that's not only arrived to us from mother to daughter, but that has transcended even time and space. You look at these recipes, you can also find them across the diaspora. If you pay attention, in New Orleans, in South Carolina, in Bahia, in Brazil, in Jamaica, in Cuba, in Mexico. People don't even realize that, but Mexico has a strong influence of West Africa. So that's a cuisine we need to really just not only respect and pay attention to, but it's very important that we also give it the credits, its due credits. And that was one of the things I thought I was going to tap into. I felt like it was important for me as I look for that inspiration, that I also bring this as my mission, to bring it to the forefront and really tell the story right. So it was all of that inspired me.
So how do they receive it? You open your first menu, open the menu book, people come and they pronounce the names. Or you have to have everything translated. And then what's the original reaction? Were there challenges at that time, and what were they?
Oh yeah, there were always challenges, and it was always signs of encouragement. When I first opened my first restaurant, it was called Yolele. It was in Bed-Stuy, and at the time, Bed-Stuy was like the hood. It was not like the gentrified Bed-Stuy that you see here. Actually, we contributed in gentrifying these areas. We were the very first sit-down restaurant with a wine menu, and it was amazing. And yes and no, I didn't want to compromise. I wanted to offer the food that I loved eating, so I thought there was a role in educating people. And it was received right away by first of all, the diaspora. Everyone was so proud of bringing their friends, their colleagues to a place that would be representing the food that they love. And it was not only the African immigrants, not only those who are the intellectuals, the bankers, but the people from the diaspora as well, the Caribbeans. That was the kind of people that would come to the restaurant. And Yolele, within first week, we had an article from the New York Times. That was something for me that was like, okay,
That's a big promotion. New York Times.
And one week. And that's one of many. We had so many we had ABC did a special television program there, because it was so unique in New York. The place was actually quite unique too. Even the inside of the place, we had these huge leafy banana trees, and we had these. A friend of mine had this collection from Cote d'Ivoire, and he was shipping them. And so this is what we use. Alpha, bless his soul. And we had these amazing statues. So it was really like an experience. And that's really what I wanted. You enter and you're having an experience. That's what a restaurant's supposed to be, offering just a cultural experience, and that's the flavors, the visual, the sound, the music, everything was transporting you to that part of the world where this food is from. And New Yorkers, it resonated. It resonated. Yeah.
So it's about identity, culture. There's some politics in it because you're asserting your culture, your identity. It's not just an individual identity, it's a national identity often, right? The food people eat in one specific space. But it's also pioneering. You are pioneering, literally. You are a trailblazer in one specific space, in this case, the American space. And you're doing this alongside other culture that actually asserting themselves, the Indian with the Chinese and so on. The question is that I raised at the beginning here, why don't we see enough African restaurant, for instance, knowing what you've just described? And I don't think I'm exaggerating. You go to any major American cities, forget the small town, any major, and you say, I want to eat some African food. People ask us this question all the time, and we don't have recommendations for them often because it's so limited, right? You go in a place even like Washington, eventually you find Ethiopian. What about the Nigerians? Where are the Senegalese? Where are the Congolese? We just said it's as diverse as the continent. Yeah, the cuisine is as diverse as the continent. Yet we don't see that diverse. We see the diversity in people. African immigrants are all over the place, like I described again. The scientists, we don't see the Pierre Thiams. Why is it such a rarity? What are the challenges there?
Many of them. And I will start with the disruption of colonization that really played a big role on us. That disruption created this mentality. We tend to not often even put so much value to our food. And I'm giving you an example. And that example that happened to me when I did this project in Lagos to open a restaurant on Victoria Island, which is like the prime areas of Lagos. And that was a first restaurant that was serving West African inspired cuisine at an upscale level. And that example of Lagos, you can find it duplicated in most major cities of Africa. If you go to the downtown areas where the best addresses are, you will see French, you will see Italian, you will see Japanese, you will see all kinds of cuisines. And oftentimes what's missing is the local cuisine. And this is this mindset that we are not thinking of ourselves in these places, and we have sometimes even stopped ourselves from even thinking of developing our cuisine to that level. And it doesn't need to be a stretch. We have plenty to be at that level. When we open Lagos, and up to today, Nok by Alara is the destination in Lagos, is the place. You go online, you look into restaurants, and it's like the locals as well as the expatriates, because the expatriates are looking for those flavors. They're here. Why they're going to be looking for French food when they are in Lagos? So that's what's been happening, and that's that same problem that we're having here. That's one of the reasons. Another reason being America has had obviously a tricky relationship with Africa in its history, and that relationship has also created lots of propaganda. I mean, you, in your system, in your medium, the media have played a role in really telling a story of Africa that is not the story that we know. And that story of Africa has created some kind of a mistrust among our potential clients, our potential customers. People don't think of Africa as the place where they will go to enjoy a wonderful meal. That was the case. I mean, it's going to change. I know it's changing, and I can see it now. I mean, yes, we are pioneering, but look at today. You look at New York City. There are restaurants like Tatiana. You cannot have a reservation at Tatiana unless you book it 6 months before. And that's a cuisine that's proudly West African inspired by my boy Kwame. Good example. Another Nigerian brother doing the same thing in Brooklyn. Department of Culture. So those are little examples that tells you that it's getting there. This year, I think there are four or five cookbooks that are coming out in the US that are inspired by West African food. And that's really a first, never seen before. The fact is, this cuisine not only is delicious, but it's also a cuisine that's timely because the conscious consumers, that is the growing number of consumers, are looking for a food that's plant-based, that's diverse. That's also the fact that Africa is the last frontier. People are now more curious and they are looking into, thanks to the media, the Food Network and all that have popularized the food to a point where people are now more comfortable into exploring other cultures. And they're realizing that this cuisine, especially the cuisine from this part of the world, is the cuisine that answers all those challenges that we're facing. You know, our world, we're facing challenges of like a food that's not diversified. We're eating the same grains. We're looking for plant-based diets now. That's what West African cuisine is. It's plant-based at its core. You know, it's like leafy vegetables, it's beans, it's grains. All of those are coming, and then the protein at a lesser scale. And the methods of cooking are so full of flavors. It's not the spicy thing that people want us to believe. Yes, we put some heat to it, but that's also optional, and we talk about it in our cookbooks. No, but the myth is making you think, oh, this West African food is unhealthy or it's too spicy. It's far from the truth. It's really far.
I think when Chinese food was trying to break into this space, they faced similar challenges as well. So did the Japanese. I mean, imagine people trying to eat sushi. It was not always easy. Most people in the world don't eat raw fish. Yeah. So, but there's an issue of packaging, maybe also, or presentation. I mean, you were talking about the French culture, the French traditions there. Even the rating is French. Michelin, everybody wants to be Michelin. So maybe there's also restructuring all that stuff. Unless it's checked, marked by Michelin, you don't exist, in so many ways, the old system. So the question to you is presentation one of the challenge? The French are they exceptional in doing presentation. They make a couple dots on your plate. They put some red circle to it, and it's going to cost you $50. And everybody says, you need to try this stuff. And you're like, what exactly I'm trying, right? So there's presentation is also part of it, tradition as well. One challenge we face a lot, at least I have seen in my experience, you travel to the US, you find African restaurants. Speaking on this side, sometimes service is a problem. In Washington, I know of a restaurant where the food is really good. But if you're going to go to that restaurant, you better eat before you leave your house. Because when you get there, it's going to take you 2 hours, an hour and a half before they bring you your food. The food will be good, but you'll be so angry at that point. You may not even be there. So the last thing I want to do is to bring my American friend to a restaurant where I know I have to eat at my house before I go to that restaurant because the service is so lousy. So is that also something that we need to train ourselves to bring up? Because time is not elastic in this space. Time is elastic in Africa. We're not often in a hurry. We have time to enjoy the food with our friends. Is that c'est un défi? Is that a challenge?
Well, yeah, and that's a challenge that's easy to fix, really. I mean, what happens oftentimes, you go to those restaurants that you're mentioning, those are mom and pop restaurants that just like entrepreneurs who have no background in the food business, really, and who know how to cook a couple of dishes from home and decide to open a restaurant. But it's more to that than a restaurant. That you mentioned, the service is a part of the restaurant, the packaging, the presentation, the plating, all of it is part of the restaurant. Most importantly, the mise en place. Mise en place is what allows you to have your menu ready so that when the customer comes and he orders it, the dish arrives to the table within 15 minutes. All of those things, there is an education. So these people that you go to in Senegal, you go to a restaurant and you wait for 2 hours for your dish to arrive. That's because they have just first thought of opening a restaurant as an eating place that will cook those dishes, but they haven't had the structure that's necessary. So it's not something that's typical of a culture. It's just about having the right people doing this profession, and that can be easily fixed. So again, and the plating that you're talking about, it's all relatives. Like we have beautiful dishes, and they can be presented in a beautiful way without compromising, without having to mimic the French way of plating. Because of these beautiful colors that come into our dish, you have like an opportunity to take your plate as a canvas, really, and turn it into something that will be attractive to the eye. You have it in the tradition. I mean, I go to homes in Senegal or in Nigeria, and sometimes a bowl is presented to you in its simplicity, but it's so beautiful.
Absolutely. I was at Terubi a few months ago in Dakar, and just the way they will plate their seafood and some dishes with everything, it's beautiful. I cannot resist but take a picture and post it on Instagram. So that means African need training is important, right? To commercialize this thing. And not commercialize in a negative way, but to repackage the food so that it's palatable to the eye.
You eat with your eyes first. You eat with your eyes.
Exactly. It's always the eyes first. Right? It's the eyes, is the smell, the mixture, and all. And then is the food, then is the top. So in terms of those entrepreneurs like yourself who are trying to eke out a space in an American setting, it's not just the food, it's not just the creativity. You need to get the finance. Is that an area that is also challenging or not? Because we see restaurants come and go. I presume it's not just about presentation, it's not about food. The sustainability itself is challenging.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a tough business. It's a tough business where every penny counts. So you have to make sure you have your accounting right as well. And I've learned that the hard way. When I first opened my first restaurant, I knew the kitchen, but I also didn't realize that I had to know the accounting. And that was easily, after 4 years, we had to close that restaurant. But I never gave up because I knew that people wanted this product. So that's when I opened my second restaurant with a better understanding of the accounting part. That's a restaurant business. You know, it's hard to find the investment because unless you have it tight, unless you have a concept that works, and that concept needs to be well thought. After 2 sit-down restaurants in New York and 2 sit-down in Lagos and Dakar, I realized that New York City for me was a place where the direction of the restaurant system would be the fast casual. And that's where the restaurant is going, the industry is going. And even those so-called Michelin star restaurants are realizing they're not sustainable. A lot of them are like just there because either sponsors or they are in the direction of closing. I have close friends in the restaurant, the top ones. Rene Redzepi, for instance, at Norma, which is like the top for a long time, he's like phasing out. He's closing officially in 2 years, and he's going in the CPG business. CPG.
What is the CPG?
CPG is, being in the mass production, in the supermarkets, which is what I've done with Yolele. We have Yolele in supermarkets now, in Whole Foods. We have Yolele at Target. We have Yolele at Mayo and at Sprouts, because that's the way for you to reach a wider audience. For me, that started with realizing that there is still going to be some people who would be intimidated by entering an African restaurant and sitting down and looking at a dish that says poisson braisé or kijenu or chewujan, and they're just like scared to try it. So fast casual was the answer to me. You come to the restaurant, and that's how I have 2 Teranga restaurants in New York. They're fast casual. You enter and you see the menu on the board, and you decide what's going to be on your plate. You want the red rice, you want the onion sauce, you want the fufu, you want the acheke, and you decide gradually what's going to be on your bowl. You want the fonio, and then you decide what protein you're going to have on your bowl. Is it going to be the roasted salmon with a shawarma topping, or is it going to be the grilled chicken with onion and with lemon marinated, and all the beans, and so those different ways of presenting just this West African cuisine. And I go abroad West Africa, and that's intentional too. I never wanted to limit myself to Senegal. I really wanted this cuisine to also be a way of decolonizing myself. These borders are not real, and this food transcends the borders. So with a fast casual approach, I was able to do that, and people have been able to just come to it comfortably. And you look at the Teranga restaurant, we have a Midtown location on 53rd and Lexington, or we have a Harlem location on 110 and 5th Avenue. When you enter it, you are surprised by the diversity. People from all backgrounds, like, hipsters, Indians, Chinese, American, Caucasians, and Africans are together coming and comfortably having these different foods because they're comfortable, they're not intimidated. The setting is inviting, but it's still having an experience. And that took me to the next level. As I'm getting to the Teranga, I also knew that it was an opportunity to educate and to bring our ingredients. Why are not our ingredients are not available in the market? Why isn't fonio in the market? So that's when I decided to bring packaging that would be an opportunity for economic prosperity for the small farming communities in Africa. So there's so many opportunities that come. We brought fonio, and that was 7 years ago in one supermarket first when Whole Foods were opening in Harlem. And today we are in all the Whole Foods in America, and we have a diversity of fonio products. We have chips, we have fonio pilafs, the yassa, the jollof. You can go and get them directly. You have them online now. So this is to tell you that people are ready for these African flavors. People are ready to try it. People are ready because they know it's having impact. It's good for their health. We even introduced our products to industries like the brewery. We have fonio beer now. We have collaborations with like Brooklyn Brewery. This is just came out in the market this week, this past week actually at Whole Foods. You can go and have fonio rising beer. That's like the third collaboration we have on fonio beer with Brooklyn Brewery and Whole Foods.
It's very impressive that we're in this case. As you look at the space, I call you a pioneer, a trailblazer. Other people will be looking into your footsteps and following into those footsteps. What is the outlook, briefly? What do you see the outlook for African cuisine in the United States? African cuisines in plural, like we say.
Oh, it's brilliant. Like I said, this journey, I've seen how these cuisines have arrived. It always started here in New York. I remember when Japanese sushi that you mentioned was starting. It was like in the late 90s, not even later than that, in the late 90s. Before that, there was no sushis in New York. I remember when Thai food was arriving in New York. I remember when Mexican food was arriving in New York. Those things that you guys see now here, they were not here. In the 90s, they were not here. In the 2000s, Mexican were not here. You would see traces of it in Texas, but it was not as widespread as it is now. And those cuisines have their limitations. Africa is so vast, has so much to offer, and there is so much creativity that's coming from that continent.
So we've just started scratching the surface.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on that note, Pierre Thiam, I'd like to thank you for joining us on Into Africa today and sharing your perspectives, which I'm sure our listeners will appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre.
It's my pleasure, Mvemba. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We want to have more conversations about Africa. Tell your friends. Subscribe to our podcast at Apple Podcasts. You can also read our analysis and reports at csis.org/Africa. So long.